Hello folks, and welcome to another Richard Head Longbows video. I'm still trying to get used to this camera, and the video that you're about to see, well, I don't know what I've done, but I've completely cocked up the sound. But I've decided to include it anyway because the information on it is still useful. So please forgive the sound quality and put up with the video, and I'm sure you'll find it useful. Thanks very much.
Hi folks, we had somebody make a query on one of the videos that I'd done on tillering, asking for an aspect on tillering. And his question was, how do I know when to brace the bow up during the tillering process? Or more to the point, he was saying that he had a bow, as I've got here now on the tiller, where the string is just loose on the bow. It's not, the bow isn't braced up at all, the string is just placed into the notch slots at either end of the bow. So I'm going to try and answer that. I tried to answer it in the message underneath the video, but actually showing you is probably going to be a little bit easier, hopefully. So at the moment I've got this one to where I'm happy to start drawing it a bit. The bottom limb was very stiff, and it still is a little bit too stiff for me to start bracing it up. And as you can see, or hopefully see, if I brace up the bow and try and show you visually on the screen here, this section's very stiff, the bottom limb stiff generally, but particularly around the handle section and on here as well. The top limb is bending a lot more here in this section, so I'm really trying to get a bit more bend into this bottom limb before I do brace it up. But that's really what it comes down to with bracing the bow up. Knowing when to brace it up is partly experience and partly saying, right, okay, that's as far as I've drawn it so far, that's as far as I'm happy to draw it so far. What you don't want to do, and as I explained in the other tillering videos, is to draw the bow and keep drawing it when you know there's an error, when you know that this section is bending a lot more than the rest of the bow, because you'll start putting a permanent bend into it. So I've got it this far, which is basically a third maybe of eventual bracing height. So I'm going to need to do the work on that bow, get it bending a little bit more, and then I'll brace the bow up to just say a couple of inches to start with. So I'm going to get on with that work, turn the video camera back on and show you where I've got to and see whether I'm happy to start bracing the bow up. Okay, I've done the work on that bow. I've taken off sections on the bottom limb and some throughout the handle on the top limb. Just going to take the last bits off this bottom limb, get rid of some of the work that I did with the rasp. I've taken out a fairly general amount on this bottom limb. I'm going to put the string back on loose onto the bow again. We'll get it on the tiller and see if we're anywhere near there. So here we are back on the tiller. Let's see if that's made any difference. Let's give it a few pulls first. Okay, I'm able to pull it a bit more now. It's starting to bend a bit more, that handle's starting to move. We've still got quite an acute bend, which I'm not happy about in that top limb, which is happening around here. So I'm going to do a bit more work on that bottom limb, get it moving a bit more, and perhaps a bit on the tip of the top limb, which is quite flat in section as well, before I'm happy to draw it up. Okay, so I've taken some out of the handle section of the bottom limb, quite a reasonable amount, and I've then also done it generally along that bottom limb. And in the top limb I have taken some out of the handle section here and a bit out at the tip. I'm trying to leave this area, which is the area which has at the moment a slight bend in it. Now this video isn't about tillering. I've already done a video on tillering. I will put that in the description and at the end of this video, so if you want to go and watch this one. This is very much trying to answer the question of somebody who's watched that video, and it really is something I hadn't sort of considered, I hadn't really put in, about when to start bracing the bow up. Now all we're trying to do is get it to the point where we can start bracing it up, and it's that decision of when you can, which is just concerning a fellow YouTuber. Now really that does come down to experience, but also the process that we're doing now, which is getting the bow to bend correctly just at that beginning of tillering it, the beginning of drawing it where the string is loose. At the moment the problems that I've got on this bow means that I'm reluctant to draw it any further than I already have, and it's at such a point where it's only bending, say, that amount, that you can't brace it up that amount. If you do, and you'll find this if you hold the bow and try and do it as if you were bracing it in this fashion, with the bow in the heel of the arch of the foot, and you're pushing on the bow will want to spin round in the hand, so it's still very stiff, very heavy, and almost got a sideways bend to it. So if you try and brace the bow up with basically no bracing height or very small amount of bracing height, you may find the bow just doesn't want to do it and will spin round in your hand. We really only want to be bracing up the bow to, say, a minimum of 3 inches or so at the beginnings of when we're going to brace the bow up. So that's what we're working towards at the moment, so that when on the tiller we're happy with the tiller shape at about the equivalent of the bend of the bow being as if it was braced up by about 3, maybe 4 inches. Sometimes when you're making a bow, the tiller can be correct fairly straight off from having done the roughing out, which means you can almost go to a full bracing height draw on the tiller when the string is loose and say to yourself, okay, it's ready to be braced up, I can brace it up to the 6 inches and carry on the tillering from there. You will see more of how to tiller the bow, where the problems are once it's braced up, but you also don't want to rush to that point. I hope that makes sense. We're going to put this on the tiller and see what we've got now. Okay, we're back on the tiller with the bow. Let's just give it a few draws and work that work in. Don't forget, when you do work on the bow, when you put it back on the tiller, give it a few draws. Get that work to bed into the bow that you've just been removing wood from. There's no good putting it on there, drawing it once or twice and thinking, oh no, it's still stiff. You need to draw it a few times, and this is actually more acutely felt as you get on with the tillering. The further you get, the more you'll find you'll need to do quite a number of draws on the bow. And certainly when I was apprenticed to my father, Richard, I would often have to draw a bow 100 times before I was able to then go back to the workbench and start again. So that might be good advice. Maybe draw it up many times, get that image in your mind of what the bow is and how it looks. Now that bottom limb is starting to come round a lot better now. We're starting to get a lot more movement in there. It's starting to look a bit freer. The limbs themselves are starting to look more the same. That handle section's starting to move. Now, some of you may be wondering what this little piece of wood here is for. That's because this bow is actually backed with bamboo. I don't know whether you can see the nodes, which are the sort of joins in the bamboo, if you like. They're a sort of nodule blobs on the back of the bamboo. Now, because of the way I attach this clamp to clamp the bow onto the tiller there, it does mean I get a bit of unevenness of where the nodes are. So I just pick that piece of wood just to straighten the bow out on the tiller, which will help your eye a bit more. That's one thing to bear in mind. I know some people use lines on the wall. You can do that if you find that helps. I personally don't, as you can see. So now I think that's at a stage where I would be happy to draw that, brace the bow up, forgive me, not draw, brace the bow up, and as you can see, it's probably at that point there where I'm holding it, it's probably half the bracing height, so I'm going to brace that up to around sort of 3 inches, maybe 4 inches, and see what we get. We'll have a look. Okay, so let's get this bow braced up a little bit. I'm going to have to guess where 3 inches is as far as adjusting the knot on the string here. So I'll undo the bowyer's knot. I'm going to mark on the bow with my finger just approximately half of what I would normally expect to find a fully braced up bow to be. And I'm going to put the bowyer's knot in the other end and see, hopefully, if that gives us anywhere near what we're looking at. Okay, as I say, when bracing the bow for the first time like this, if you feel that it's still too stiff in the hand, it's starting to turn around in the hand when I'm putting pressure on it, then take a bit more wood off if it's still really difficult to turn in the hand. Now, bearing in mind this is target weight bows we're making here, we're not making heavy war bows, so this really only applies if you're making the target weight type of bow, whereas if you're making a war bow, obviously you're going to be trying to keep it as heavy as possible. So I'm actually going to use a stringer here, which is much easier for me, much easier for my back, and there's less problems because, well, I'll tell you a story, and it's happened quite often. Let's just see if we can brace that. No, I haven't done that enough. I don't know if you can see that on there, but that's virtually starting to crush my fingers now. In fact, it is crushing my fingers. So this is a good example, and was the story that I was going to tell you, that quite often you can end up trapped, particularly if you're doing it without a stringer, with the bow either twisting completely round on itself or your fingers being, as I said, it's getting quite tight now on my fingers, so I'm going to put my foot back on the string and yeah, unbrace that. So that means I'm going to have to move the bowyer's knot. We haven't put quite enough on there to get that to a bracing height. So yeah, I really advise using a stringer, which is just a piece of string, not a modern bow stringer. So I've adjusted this bottom knot, the bowyer's knot, by about 1.5 inches there, and we'll see what difference that makes to the bracing height. And again, we're not going for full bracing height, we're going for partial bracing height here. Okay. Oops. No, I've done it too much there. And we can actually see. There we go. We've probably got slightly too much bend in this bottom limb now. Now, there you are. Good example. You can see more when the bow is braced up and when it's unbraced. So the value of bracing the bow up, I have actually braced it up more than I was expecting to do, but there we are. So I'm going to have to do some work on that top limb now. Okay, lesson learned.
Okay folks, I've got it back on the tiller. I've taken some off that top limb, which was bending once we'd braced it to full bracing height, which we didn't actually want to do. But when it was at full bracing height, it did reveal to us that I'd taken too much off that bottom limb. I've been too aggressive in trying to even it up with the acute bend that we had in the top limb. Now I've taken some off that top limb to try and account for that. So if I draw that up, hopefully, yeah, we can see that's an awful lot better than it was. And also we are now at the point where we can say, okay, right, yes, we can get it up to full bracing height. Now, because I'd accidentally put it up to full bracing height there, because as I say, it's quite difficult to guess the length every time. If I'd have carried on and just put it on the tiller, with that large discrepancy between the limbs, I would have done more damage, more harm than good. So by reducing it back down to, as I say, what it is now, which is about 3.5 inches, I can still see any problems in it, but I'm not causing more problems. I'm not overbending the bow before I've rectified any mistakes, like the mistake I made of taking too much off that bottom limb. So this video, you're getting a 2-for-1 there, really. You're getting to see when you should be bracing the bow up, and also seeing that when mistakes happen, if you do try and brace the bow up too early and then continue to work on it, you can cause yourself a problem. But by bracing the bow up, by being brave and saying, okay, I've drawn it there to that point, I can brace it up, you can see so much more. You can see discrepancies between the limbs far easier than you ever will by continuing to tiller the bow with the string just being loose and the bow not being braced up. So I do encourage you to get the bow braced up. You will see more, like I said at the beginning, but you need to be delicate with that. You need to do it in stages. So as I say, we've got this one to 3.5. It's looking a lot better. I'm going to brace it up to full bracing height and we'll see how it looks then. Okay, so I've braced it up to near as damn it full bracing height. Let's draw that up now. See how it's starting to look. Yeah, and that's looking an awful lot better. The limbs are much more even now. I'm much more happy about that. So now I can just carry on tillering, which always makes it sound like a film from the 60s starring Kenneth Williams. But you know what I mean. So yeah, I'm not going to do any more on that now for this video, simply because it's just going to turn into a tillering video rather than just a video about when to brace the bow up. And like I say, it really does come down to your eye and your experience and saying, right, okay, I've drawn the bow like this with the string loose to a point that approximates bracing height, so I can start bracing the bow up, and going from there really, and just bracing up a little bit at a time. And fortuitously, you can never really plan these videos very well as when you're actually tillering a bow, but you've actually got to see a mistake and see how bracing the bow up allowed me to see that. Whereas just having the string loose on the bow, I would not necessarily have seen it in time before it caused more damage. And of course, not bracing the bow up too high before you've rectified any mistakes. So hopefully that all makes sense, and I can carry on tweaking this bow to my heart's content. And as promised, the video on how to tiller is sort of over here-ish. And if you'd like to subscribe and all that jazz, then please do. That's sort of over here. Thanks very much for watching, folks. See you again. Cheers.